Cancer deathtoll. Cancer deathtoll is the guardian of the fourth temple, that of the giant crab, Cancer, in the sanctuary of 1747. This saint is in charge of helping souls in suffering who cannot sever their connection to the underworld and wander by the Cancer temple. For that he builds coffins, and with them he returns them to the beyond. Thanks to that, he is known as the Coffin Builder. This is probably part of a kind of ritual with which souls are appeased. That way, they can sever their connection to the world of the living and finally rest in peace. He gets in the way of Tenma and Shun and reveals that even knowing the betrayal of the pontiff, he will not let them pass through his temple. He locks them in the Omerta and sends them to Yomotsu Hirasaka with his body and everything. There he demonstrates his great power by beating not only the bronze saints but also Suikyo. Once he lost the effect of the Genro Maoken. After acknowledging that he had left the Garuda Spectre alive with the intention of joining the army of Hades in the future, he is finally locked in the Coffin of Silence by being tricked by Tenma. Later he is saved by a group of specters who try to enter the sanctuary, but who need the help of deathtoll to get out of the Yomotsu. Cancer Saint accepts and leads them into a trap in the Temple of the Lion, where each and every one of them is torn to pieces by Goldie, the guardian lion. After asking Kaiser not to chase Suikyo, since his true intentions are not evil, he retires to his temple, hinting that he no longer intends to betray Athena. Its appearance, as we already mentioned, is totally different than from that of Death Mask. If Cancer Saint of the present was considered a character almost by shonen, with deathtoll we have the opposite. Not only is he ugly, but he also acts and talks in a very mannered, almost homosexual way. He is also a very charismatic and funny character who only follows his instincts and prioritizes his work of sending the sad souls to the afterlife instead of committing to his duty to protect Athena. Even at the beginning, he demonstrates his intention to betray the goddess when he considers joining the Hades side, although in the end his redemption is implied by leading a group of specters into a trap to the Temple of the Lion to be eliminated. Techniques: Sekishiki Meikai Ha, which translates into Waves of the Underworld Precept. This technique, unlike the one that Death Mask possesses, does not separate the soul, but sends the enemy with a body and everything to Yomotsu Hirasaka. That's interesting. In the next dimension, we learn something that we already suspected from the classic manga. Specters cannot be sent to the afterlife due to the quality that surplices possess. Surplices are the armor of specters, which allow their wearer to move freely between the world of the dead and of the living. Another technique is the Cancer All Beauty Ken, or translated means Fist of All Beautiful Cancer. Exclusive Cancer deathtoll technique, with which he knocks enemies out by locking them in their coffins, by expelling a very colorful Cosmo. He also has the Peach Attack. It is not yet known if this is a technique that should be considered official for Cancer Saint, or if it is just a prank played by Kuruma. The truth is that the attack consists of sitting violently on the enemy to crush him. Wow. Deathtoll demonstrates its great power by eliminating the Worm Spectre with this technique. This attack is based on the attack by Peach, the Nintendo princess, in which she eliminates her enemies by sitting on them. This quote-unquote technique is undoubtedly a reference to Cancer Saint's homosexual attitude. Now, the etymology of the name. Cancer no deathtoll. Deathtoll, like Death Mask, is a nickname. It means death count, which makes up a pun that would form Cancer Deathtoll, one of the many words games in the names that Kurumada chooses. Curiosities. It has a coffin inherited from the mythological era called Omerta, also known as the Coffin of Silence. This coffin has the ability to absorb and lock up anyone who answers a question once it is opened. Regardless of the response, it will absorb the enemy. This coffin is based on the Omerta, the code of silence of the Sicilian mafia. This code consisted in silencing or eliminating anyone who spoke more about the activities of the mafia group. Constellation. Cancer does not have bright stars. Cancer is known among astronomy fans as the constellation in which Praesepe, or M44, is located, also known as the Manger, an open cluster that also contains the star Epsilon Cancri that spans more than 1 square degree, being observable to simple, seen as a diffuse light that can be resolved into stars with simple binoculars. Located inside the Manger, although far behind it, there is a group of galaxies belonging to the Coma-Virgo cluster that are only visible with medium-powered telescopes. Other deep sky objects found in Cancer are M67, an open cluster known since ancient times, and NGC 2775, a 11.3 magnitude spiral galaxy. On a clear night, the constellation contains about 50 stars visible to the naked eye. Mythology. The Crab constellation and the Hydra constellation are related to one of the 12 works of Heracles, Roman Hercules. The goddess Hera, a staunch enemy of Heracles, sent a giant crab to end her life while he fought with the fearsome Hydra snake. However, Heracles was victorious. As a reward for her efforts, the goddess formed the constellation of the Crab and the Hydra in the sky. Deathtoll, or Desotoru in Japanese, was the golden saint of Cancer prior to the previous holy war against Hades, narrated in Saint Seiya Next Dimension. He is known by the nickname the Coffin Seller or the Coffin Builder. He is quite a peculiar character due to his appearance, personality, and attitude, but these qualities also make him one of the most pleasant characters in Saint Seiya. Appearance. Deathtoll is an aesthetically ugly character. At first glance, his hair is bright red. He highlights that he is actually bald and wears a wig. Its nose is long and slightly aquiline. Its eyes are brown and small. Its mouth is long and its chin is often drawn in a cartoonish way. His face shares a great similarity with other characters that, like him, were created by the author to be ugly, such as Jamian of Cuervo, that's Crow, Ichi of Hydra, or Sharon of Aquironte. Try saying that 3 times in a row fast. Now counting Ox's tough complexion of Taurus, Deathtoll is the first saint of gold not to fall into the Baishonen attractive man classification. He appears to have a healthy athletic body. However, after receiving Beermir's Griffin's cosmic marionation variation, Deathtoll was forcibly contorted and ended up stuck in the way Beermir left him. Although he too claims that it's a position that is comfortable for him and that prefers, quote unquote, to stay like this. A remarkable detail is the fact that after having rolled over his face due to his posture, his nose gradually ceased to be visible, presumably being submerged. Deathtoll is a very charismatic, comical, and funny character who only follows his instincts and prioritizes his work of sending the souls in pain to the afterlife, instead of committing to his duty to protect Athena. Even at the beginning, he demonstrates the intention to betray the goddess when he considers joining the Hades side, although in the end his redemption is implied by leading a group of specters to a trap to the house of Leo, to be eliminated by Goldie, Kaiser, and by himself. Deathtoll has stated that he wants to win benefits and favors from the army of Hades in exchange for his help, but in the fight with Beermir, he says that as long as there are despicable people and garbage like him, he would never betray Athena. Deathtoll at first glance seems to be an interesting and convincing character, but this is nothing more than a charade to deceive his enemies and allies, to keep them away from danger, of course. He truly is an honorable saint and concerned with his mission to protect the sanctuary and its allies. He shows a lot of joy, since despite being twisted by Beermir's attacks, his joy to move happily as a ball is noted. From another perspective, although within his comedy, Deathtoll is a vain man, concerned at all times with his appearance and his quote-unquote style, as evidenced by his techniques, his nails, and especially the importance to him of his wig, as he tells Beermir that quote-unquote a good warrior remains beautiful until the end, even when he is about to die. History. Childhood. Deathtoll in his childhood was not sure which genre he belonged to, which made him very sad because others made fun of him. When he told Odysseus about his problem, Odysseus reminded him that he would be the golden saint of Cancer, and that when that happened, he would shine more than any other person, a statement that pleased the young aspirant. After that, Deathtoll made the Silver Saint promise that when he became the Cancer Saint, he would do him a favor. At an undetermined time, Deathtoll told the young Kaiser that a pack of giant lions commanded by the Lion King attacked the village of Rodorio, so the would-be Saint of Leo set out to confront the beasts. When the deadly battle between Kaiser and the Lion King ended, Deathtoll and Odysseus found Kaiser about to die. Sometime later, Deathtoll and the rest of the Golden Saints aspired to verify if Odysseus, Doko, and Xion were all right, since the Bronze Saints would go to train on a dangerous island. Deathtoll witnessed how Odysseus' body suffered several burns from the eruption of the volcano. Deathtoll was present at Odysseus' funeral along with the other people helped by the Silver Saint.
The Temple of Cancer. Tenma and Shun arrive at the Cancer House once they manage to get through the Temple of Gemini. Shun of Andromeda and Tenma of Pegasus head towards the Temple of Cancer. But before entering, Shun explains to Tenma the meaning of the temple. He also describes the terrified power of the Cancer Guardian in the future, clarifying that if the Guardian of the Cancer Temple was like them, he will surely be a terrifying opponent. When they enter the Cancer Temple, In the dark they begin to hear the lamentations of the dead. On their way they find that the temple guardian also has the walls of the Cancer temple covered with the faces of the dead, from which the lamentations come they had heard. Seeing this scene, Shun begins to wonder if the Cancer saint of this era is equal to that of the future, a corrupted saint who plays with the souls of the dead. On their way inside the temple they meet their guardian, who is making coffins to their surprise. When he notices their presence he presents himself with the name of Cancer Deathtoll. It also tells them the nickname by which he is known, the Coffin Maker Deathtoll. The fight against Deathtoll. Once he introduces himself, to his surprise Tenma asks him why he builds the coffins. He begins to tell them about the dead who constantly arrive at the Temple of Cancer. They are the ones who have not been able to let go of their resentments of the world, so he places them in coffins and sends them back to the world of the dead. Deathtoll asks them which coffin they want, to which they reply that they are not dead, but come to report on the Patriarch's betrayal and the danger Athena is in. He replies that he is aware of the invasion of the sanctuary, but he does not care who they are. Everyone who enters the Temple of Cancer without permission will be sent to the next world. Deathtoll locks them both in Japanese ceremonial coffins and then uses the Sakishiki Makaiha, sends them to the Yomotsu. Upon arriving at the place, Shun becomes aware of Seiya's soul, but when he cannot do anything, he hears the voice of Athena, who, with her Cosmo, guides him towards the exit. In the Cancer Temple, Tenma's coffin breaks, causing it to not be sent. Tenma stands up to attack Deathtoll with the Pegasus Ryu Seiken, which he stops with a single finger. When he was ready to take down Tenma, the Andromeda chain gets in the way. Annoyed to see that his plans had not gone well, Deathtoll decides to lock them in the Omerta, an ancient stone chest bequeathed to the Cancer Saints. Cancer vs. Garuda. When Deathtoll prepares to take the Omerta to Yomotsu Hill and throw them straight to his death, Suikyo Dakopa appears. Deathtoll knows the identity of the former saint of Athena. Despite warning him that it will not happen, she decides to let him continue on his way, thinking about his personal interests. Hearing this, Suikyo insults him by calling him trash for betraying Athena, when his duty as a saint is to protect her. Deathtoll compares his situation to Suikyo's, but tells him that they are not the same since he is trying to play on both sides. Deathtoll, enraged, throws the Omerta and decides to send it along with Suikyo to the world of the dead. But being a ghost, he is not affected by the Sakishiki Makaiha. Deathtoll realizes that he was only able to send the Omerta to the other world. He also realizes that Suikyo is under the effects of the Genro Mooken. Suikyo begins to hit him, but only deals minor damage to him. So the Cancer Saint comes up with the idea of using Shun and Tenma as a sacrifice to free him from the effects of the technique. Upon reaching the world of death he finds the Omerta on the edge of the hole, but realizes that Suikyo had followed him to the place. Shun and Tenma break free from the Omerta, only to find Suikyo, who is willing to kill anyone in his way. Shun and Tenma confront him, but cannot do anything against him. Tenma, who still believes in his teacher, faces it. When he was about to die, he is saved by his master, who stops bleeding. Suikyo regains consciousness, arguing that the Imperial Satan had not had any effect on him, to the surprise of Deathtoll himself, who was watching and laughing happily at the combat.